Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. Alright, so in this video, let's talk about the Sony FX9. Did you know that I had coffee skills and not just cinematography skills? Yeah, we're actually filming today in me and my wife's macaron and coffee shop because I'm in the process of moving out of my apartment and I just couldn't film in there, so I decided to come here to film some stuff today. If you're new to the channel, my name is Spencer Sakurai. I've been a cinematographer for the last 10 years. I've shot for brands like Adidas, ESPN, Google, and recently I got to shoot a music video with Leon Bridges, but more on that later. In this video, we're going to talk about the Sony FX9. Now, there's plenty of other videos on YouTube that do in-depth, long-form reviews. Philip Bloom, I'm looking at you, on the Sony FX9. And so I'm not going to really do that today. Really, when I test out a camera, I just want to look at the image quality and kind of test out some features that would interest me in a camera before using it. So the Sony FX9 is in that kind of mid-tier cinema camera territory. You know, it comes in around like $11,000, I think, for the basic kit. And you can make that bigger and put the V-mount module on there, and then like kind of the raw output module that kind of adds a little bit more money. But for this, I'm just using the regular cards that go into it. I'm not using any raw. I'm just using the high bitrate codec when shooting. I just really wanted to check out the image quality of this camera. I wanted to test out the autofocus a little bit too. I haven't really used autofocus a lot in my cinematography career because I've never had a reason to. Usually I'm just using manual focus. I'm using my kind of older lenses. But for this, I did a little bit of both. I shot something in a kind of a scenario that I would normally shoot a commercial with, like kind of in my style. So I put on my vintage lenses. I put on a softening filter, a Tiffin Black Pro Mist. And then I also did some tests with this Sony G Master lens, the 24-70, and I did some with this Dream Effects filter on, which I have on now, and I did some without, so you could just kind of see what this camera can do with just a Sony lens with some autofocus and no filtration in the front of it. Everything that was on the opening of this video is actually shot with autofocus and the G Master lens. So the first thing I did after I picked up the camera was I wanted to test it against my Ursa Mini 4.6K. They're, you know, going for less than $3,000 used on the internet right now. It's a bit of an older camera, but it does have a really nice image in bitrate codec, you know, really high-end bitrate codec, just like this camera would have too. It's rated at 15 stops of dynamic range, so I wanted to see how this camera would compare to that just by image quality and the dynamic range. And then how much I could push and pull it in post, of course. So I just set up a little side-by-side at my friend Aaron Newberry's house. Aaron is a film composer and he does production audio on set. And if you want to check out some of his work, I will have all of his information in the description below. But let's not stress that too much. Let's just see what this camera can produce on its own. So the next thing I did, I just threw up a light in Aaron's studio and kind of filmed around with him while he was kind of playing with some audio for a commercial that we're working on right now. Because the sun was blasting into those windows and I was struggling a little bit to get my exposure correct without blowing out the windows. So I think there is a lot of dynamic range on this camera, but sometimes you just can't compete with window light. So I did my best to do that. I used the internal NDs on the camera, which was really handy. It's got a nice little thumb wheel on the side of it, so you can, once you kind of kick on the NDs, you can adjust the ND very incrementally versus using just like some of the other built-in NDs on other cinema cameras where you basically have 2-stop increments or 4-stop increments where you're just like, it's just shifting from one ND filter to another. This one you can actually roll and do a more micro adjustments, which was really nice to have. And I think that's kind of where that price point comes in on this camera. The reason it is a little bit more expensive is not just because of the image quality, but because of all the features that are built into this camera. That being said, I've never really been a big fan of Sony cameras because of their menu system, and then S-Log for me is just kind of annoying to grade. I know people get amazing images out of it, and you'll see I got some really nice images out of this camera in this video, but the S-Log profile is just really confusing to me, and I'm just not used to it. So when I got into Aaron's studio, I shot with my Canon FD 55mm f1.2. I shot it mostly at f2 though, because I like the sharpness at f2. And I did put a quarter black Pro Mist on there, a Tiffin black Pro Mist, because that's how I would normally shoot like a commercial. I like to kind of get some gritty images. I like to have those highlights bloom a little bit. If you want to see my tests over cinema filters like the Cine Bloom, the Dream Effects, and the Tiffin Black Pro Mist, you should go ahead and check out my last video that I put out. Now I was going to just use the Rec 709 profile at first, but then I wanted to see how it would look if I color graded it kind of the way I normally do. So I actually converted all the S-Log 3 footage to ARRI Log C with the transform in DaVinci Resolve, and then I used one of my Kodak film emulation LUTs on there just to kind of see how it would look like that instead of just using the stock Rec 709. And also this camera does have that new profile, the S-Cine tone, which is kind of a nice soft version of Rec 709 to shoot in, which I did attempt to shoot in that a little bit, but you lose so much dynamic range when you do that. It was kind of limiting when I was shooting against those windows, so I decided not to shoot in that. I decided to shoot in S-Log 3 for all the rest of the tests so I could have the most dynamic range possible. But the S-Cine tone does look really nice. I think if you had really controlled lighting and you were in a really controlled environment, the Cine tone would be really good for projects that you need to kick out really fast and you didn't have a lot of time to color grade. So overall, I think this footage looks really nice. You know, once I finally figured out how to color grade the footage a little bit, I felt like this looks really nice. I definitely could have done a lot more to light this and make it look better, but I wanted to see how the camera could just perform in a very quick scenario like that. You can really see how a camera's dynamic range is when you're not actually lighting it well. You know, the cheaper the camera gets, the more I tend to pay attention to my lighting because it matters more because the dynamic range isn't there. So after testing it in that kind of moody commercial environment, I decided to take it home and play with the autofocus a little bit with the Sony G Master 24-70. I didn't want to go too deep into this. I just wanted to see how it would work kind of practically. I did actually put a Dream Effects filter on the front of this just to kind of add some more softness to the image and just kind of see how it looked while using the autofocus lens versus using a vintage lens. And I had to play with the settings a little bit. You know, I had it on my face priority for this next setup, and it really wants to see your eyeballs when you do that, because even if you look down like this, and maybe right now you can see that, it actually would go out of focus if it was on that eye tracking priority. So I ended up turning up the speed of the autofocus quite a bit, and then playing with the settings. Sometimes I would turn off the face tracking and just put it on the zone tracking just to see how it would track my body moving back and forth. So you can see that here in this footage here, I have it, you know, tracking the beer can, I have it tracking my body, and I'm looking up and around, and you can kind of see how that autofocus tracks with my face. Now I think once you know the settings, this autofocus is super, super good. It was just taking a second for me to get used to it. So before we move on to the next section, let me talk about today's sponsor, which is Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to present your work online. So if you're a cinematographer, photographer, director, whatever, you're going to need a website to present your work online. That's just a matter of fact. I don't need to debate with you about that, and you know that. So whether you're using one of the pre-built templates or you just want to go completely custom with your website, Squarespace makes it super easy. You can just drag and drop your videos on there. It'll embed YouTube videos and Vimeo videos, and you can create galleries of photos or portfolios. You can add basically whatever you want to a website. You can even have a contact form on there so people can reach out to you. So if you're anything like me and you want a really easy solution to presenting your work online, just build it with Squarespace. So click the link in the description if you want a free trial and 10% off. Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. So for my last test, I brought the Sony FX9 to me and my wife's macaron and coffee shop here, and I decided to make a cappuccino and try to film myself using the autofocus system and with no filter in the front of it this time. Now obviously you're not filming yourself that often, that's not something that you're going to do that often, but I did want to see if it would make things move a little bit quicker, and if it's something that I might want to use on a smaller project where it was just me and I didn't have any help, and the autofocus might come in handy. So I only had this camera for a couple of days, so I don't think I can make a full conclusive opinion on what I think about it. I do think that the image is really nice based on what I've used so far. Once again, S-Log3 is just not my favorite color profile to use, but I think once I got used to it, I think I would be totally okay with it. I think it has a really nice codec. I think that it has a very nice dynamic range, and I definitely think the quality is really good. Now, is it worth $11,000? I'm not sure. I think the other features in the camera is what kind of gives it that price tag, and it's less about the image, but I do want to say that the image is really, really nice, and if you know how to grade a S-Log3, you'll really, really love this camera. But I'll let you be the judge, and you can tell me what you think in the comments below. So definitely, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up. If you loved it, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell notification if you want to see more content like this in the future. And as always, I'm Spencer Sakurai. Until next time, guys, cheers.